There is a particular kind of tired that has nothing to do with sleep. It is the tired that comes from making yourself smaller so someone else can feel bigger. The tired that comes from swallowing an opinion because the room wasn't ready for it. The tired that comes from laughing at something that wasn't funny, agreeing with something you didn't believe, apologizing for something that was never your fault. Over and over, in 100 small moments that never individually seemed worth fighting over. You didn't decide to shrink. Nobody sits down one day and chooses to become less. It happens the way water wears down stone, slowly, invisibly, one small accommodation at a time, until one day you look at your life, your relationships, your career, the version of yourself that shows up in rooms full of other people, and you don't quite recognize the outline. You have gotten good at making yourself easy to be around, easy to manage, easy to overlook, and somewhere underneath the person you have become for everyone else, there is still the person you were before you learned that your full size made people uncomfortable. Here is what the Stoics understood, 2,000 years before anyone had a name for people-pleasing or the quiet erosion of self that happens when you spend your life managing other people's comfort at the expense of your own. Shrinking yourself does not protect you. It does not make you safe. It does not in the end even make people like you more. It simply teaches the world that your full presence is negotiable. Stay until the end. Because the fifth principle is the one that changes everything that came before it. Before we go further, I want to name something plainly, because most people who do this have never had it named for them. Shrinking yourself is not humility. It is not selflessness. It can look like both of those things from the outside, but underneath the surface, when shrinking becomes a permanent posture rather than an occasional courtesy, it is something else entirely. It is the slow surrender of a self that was never supposed to be negotiable. Epictetus taught his students something that sounds almost harsh until you understand what he had survived to arrive at it. You are not your body, nor your possessions, but your capacity to choose. We will return to exactly how he came to know that and where he was standing when he learned it in a moment. But hold on to it, because everything today builds from that single idea. Today, we are going to walk through 5 principles the Stoics built their lives around. 5 things that become true the moment you stop shrinking for people who were never going to appreciate the sacrifice anyway. And for each one, we are going to do 2 things. Meet someone living through it right now and go back to the actual room, the actual year, the actual moment where a Stoic first discovered it, often at a far higher cost than anything being asked of you. Not as encouragement, as architecture. Yes, the people who need you small are telling you something. Meet Walter. He is 47, a structural engineer who has spent 11 years at a firm in Denver, quietly doing some of the most technically demanding work in the office, while somehow remaining almost invisible in every meeting where credit gets assigned. Walter is not incompetent. He is, by any honest measure, one of the most capable people on his team. But he has a habit, so old and so automatic he no longer experiences it as a choice, of deferring the moment credit is on the table. Someone else summarizes his analysis in a meeting and gets the nods of approval. Someone else takes the client call about a solution Walter designed. Someone else's name ends up on the presentation slide. He told himself this was simply his personality. He wasn't a self-promoter. He let the work speak for itself. The moment that cracked this open came on an ordinary Tuesday, when his supervisor, a man named Craig, who had built an entire career on absorbing the labor of people quieter than himself, presented Walter's redesign of a load-bearing structure to senior leadership as his own strategic insight. Walter sat in the back of the room and watched Craig receive praise for 6 months of his own late nights. He went home and asked himself, for the first time in 11 years, a question he had never let himself finish. Why does Craig get to take up all this space while I take up almost none? Craig didn't need Walter small because Walter was actually small. Craig needed Walter small because Walter's full size, fully credited, would have exposed exactly how much of Craig's success depended on erasing it. Now leave that Denver conference room for a moment. Let's go back nearly 2,000 years to a household on the outskirts of Rome, in the reign of the Emperor Nero. The man living there has no name of his own choosing. He is known simply as the property of Epictetus, a wealthy freedman who serves as one of Nero's secretaries. His body belongs, in the full legal sense of the word, to another person. He can be beaten, sold, silenced, or killed, and the law of Rome will record none of it as a wrong done to him, because in the eyes of that law, he is not fully a person. He is an asset. One version of the story, passed down by later writers, describes his master twisting his leg during a punishment, calmly, almost idly, while the young slave simply observed, without flinching, that if his master kept twisting, the leg would break. His master kept twisting, the leg broke, and the young man is said to have responded with nothing more than the same flat observation, "Did I not tell you that it would break?" That young man's name was Epictetus, and the thing that should stop you cold about that story is not the cruelty of it, it is the composure. Somewhere inside a body that was, by every legal and social measure available in first-century Rome, completely owned by someone else, there was a part of Epictetus that his master's hands could never reach. This is where the line comes from. You are not your body nor your possessions, but your capacity to choose. Epictetus did not write that as a comforting abstraction. He wrote it as a description of the one thing he had personally verified, under the worst possible test, could not be taken from him. If a man who could be legally owned held that his true self was not negotiable, what does it say about the rest of us, who shrink not because we are owned, but because we are afraid of a mildly uncomfortable meeting? This is the first principle. The people who benefit from your smallness will never be the ones who ask you to grow. Notice their comfort with your silence for what it actually is, a dependency they have never had to justify because you have never once made them justify it. Walter, months after that Tuesday, finally tested this. The next time Craig moved to take credit for his analysis, Walter waited for the natural pause in the meeting and spoke, calmly, without heat. I want to add some context, since I built that model. There were 3 failure points we had to account for that aren't in the summary Craig gave. Happy to walk through them if it's useful? That was all. No accusation. Just Walter occupying the space that had always belonged to him, out loud, in front of the room. Craig's face did something complicated. The room's attention shifted toward the person who actually understood the material. Nothing dramatic happened that day, but something had changed permanently. 2. Your nervous system learned smallness. It can unlearn it. There is a woman we should call Priya. She is 34, an architect, and for as long as she can remember, her body has responded to conflict before her mind gets a vote. Someone raises their voice, even slightly. Someone's face changes in a way that signals displeasure, and before Priya has consciously registered any of it, her chest tightens, her voice gets quieter, her opinions dissolve into something vague and agreeable, and she finds herself apologizing for a position she hadn't even finished stating. She used to think this was just who she was, sensitive, conflict-averse. It took her into her 30s to understand that there is a difference between genuine consideration for others and a reflexive self-censorship that has almost nothing to do with the people currently in the room. She had grown up in a household where her father's moods governed the emotional weather, and she had learned as a child that shrinking was not a personality trait. It was survival. The problem is that the strategy never got updated. It kept running in her 30s because her nervous system did not know the danger had passed. It only knew the old pattern. Now step away from Priya's office for a moment and travel with me to Rome again, this time to the Senate House in the final decades of the Republic, before Rome had emperors at all. A man is standing in the middle of the chamber alone, refusing to sit down. Julius Caesar, soon to be the most powerful man who has ever lived in that city, is proposing a measure that this man believes is corrupt and dangerous to the Republic. Everyone around him understands with total clarity what opposing Caesar in public can cost a man. Careers have ended over less. Lives have ended over less. The man does not raise his voice. He does not perform outrage. He simply states his objection plainly and refuses to be moved by the room's obvious desire for him to sit back down and let it pass quietly. when his political enemies, exasperated, eventually have him dragged bodily out of the Senate for refusing to stop talking, he does not resist with violence. He simply keeps speaking as he is carried out, as though his removal changes nothing about the correctness of what he said. This was Cato the Younger, and what almost no one remembers about Cato is that his famous composure, the thing that later made even Caesar say he feared Cato more than any other man in Rome, was not natural to him. By his own household's account, Cato trained it deliberately the way an athlete trains a muscle. He wore dark, unfashionable clothing in public on purpose, inviting the stares and quiet mockery of Roman high society, specifically so he could practice not flinching from disapproval. He walked without a tunic under his toga through crowds who found it scandalous. For the same reason, he was, quite literally, rehearsing indifference to other people's opinions of him in low-stakes moments, so that when the stakes became enormous, a Senate chamber, Julius Caesar, his own political survival, the reflex to shrink simply wasn't there to override him. That is the second principle, and it is the one hiding inside Priya's story. The instinct to shrink is not fixed. It is trained, usually by accident in childhood under real threat. And what was trained by accident can be retrained on purpose, the way Cato retrained himself in the mockery of the Roman streets before he ever needed the composure in the Senate. Priya began something small. When she felt the familiar tightening, she started pausing for one breath before speaking, not to suppress the instinct, just to create a half-second of space between the old reflex and her actual response. In that half-second, she asked herself one question: is this my father's house, or is this a conference room in 2026 with people who have never once threatened me? The answer was almost always the second thing. Marcus Aurelius, writing in a tent on a military campaign centuries after Cato, put the whole mechanism in a single sentence. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Priya's power was never over the raised voice across the table. It was over the half-second before her own voice disappeared. 3. Some people only love the small version of you. Picture a man named Desmond. He is 41, and for the better part of 15 years he has been the reliable one in every relationship he has ever had. The friend who shows up, the brother who mediates, the partner who adjusts. Desmond's shrinking took a specific shape. It was about needs. He had decided somewhere in his 20s that his needs were an inconvenience to other people, and he spent every year since proving that theory correct by never voicing them. He told himself this was generosity, that he simply wasn't a needy person. It was never tested until his father died, and in the disorienting weeks that followed, Desmond, for the first time in his adult life, actually needed people. And what he discovered in the rawest way possible was that most of the people around him had never learned how to show up for him, because he had never once given them the practice. Some rose to meet him in that season. Others, including the partner he'd been with for 6 years, grew distant, almost resentful, as though the version of Desmond who had needs was a violation of an agreement she hadn't realized she'd made. Now leave that grief behind for a moment and go with me to the island of Corsica, roughly 8 years into the reign of the Emperor Claudius. A man sits in exile there, banished from Rome on a charge of adultery that most historians believe was politically manufactured, stripped of his position, his property largely seized, cut off from the city and the career he had spent his life building. He writes letter after letter back to Rome, to the people he had considered his closest circle, hoping for support, for advocacy, for someone to argue his case before the emperor's court. Almost none of them do. The silence teaches him something he later spent the rest of his life writing about. His name was Seneca, and the friends who vanished the moment he stopped being useful to know were never, he came to understand, actually his friends. They were in a relationship with his proximity to power. The moment that proximity became a liability instead of an asset, the relationship simply had nothing left to run on. Seneca wrote to his real friend Lucilius years later about how to tell the difference before the exile comes, because most people only discover who was actually there for them after the cost has already been paid. Nothing is so much to be feared as a needy friend, except one who is needed and knows it. He meant that the true test of a relationship is not how it behaves when it costs nothing. It is how it behaves when it costs something. This is the third principle. The people who only know the small, accommodating, needless version of you will not know what to do with your full self. And some of them, like Seneca's fair-weather Roman circle, will simply disappear the moment you require something back. Desmond began in the months after his father's death, saying a sentence he had never said in 15 years. "I need something from you." Some relationships deepened beautifully. The 6-year relationship did not survive it. That was not in the end a tragedy. It was Seneca's lesson arriving 2,000 years later in a much smaller and much kinder form than exile. Information about who was actually there, finally allowed to surface. 4. Shrinking is a habit of the mind before it is a habit of the body. Now meet a woman named Josephine. She is 58, a retired school teacher, and she has spent most of her adult life with a very specific inner voice, one that speaks before she does, editing her thoughts down to the version least likely to bother anyone. Don't say that, it'll sound arrogant. Don't ask for that, it'll seem demanding. Don't take up that much space in the conversation. She did not experience this voice as unusual. It took her into retirement, a season with an unusual amount of unstructured time to notice her own mind, to understand how relentless the inner editor actually was, running even in conversations with a husband who had never once in 31 years punished her for taking up space. The voice, she eventually realized, was not responding to anything in her present life. It was responding to a father who had rewarded quiet daughters, absorbed so long ago she had stopped experiencing it as inherited and started experiencing it as simply her own personality. Now come with me to a small town in Greece called Nicopolis in the early 2nd century, to a school run by an aging former slave who is, by this point in his life, one of the most sought-after teachers in the entire Roman world. Students travel enormous distances, some of them wealthy young Romans who have never had to justify a single assumption in their lives, to sit on hard benches and be, in a very real sense, dismantled. This teacher's entire method is built around a single relentless question asked about every belief a student walks in holding. Is this actually true, or is it simply an opinion you inherited and never examined? He asks it about their fear of death. He asks it about their fear of poverty. He asks it about their fear of what other people think of them. This was Epictetus's own school, decades after the broken leg, after he had been freed and become the most respected philosophy teacher of his era. And the discipline he drilled into every student who sat in that room was precisely the discipline Josephine needed 60 years later without knowing his name. Everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact. Everything we see is a perspective, not the truth. That line belongs to Marcus Aurelius, who studied Epictetus's teachings so closely, he carried a copy of them on military campaign. But it is Epictetus's classroom, that relentless is this actually true, that gave the idea its shape. This is the 4th principle. Before shrinking becomes a behavior, it is a belief, inherited so early it feels like temperament instead of instruction, and beliefs, like the ones Epictetus made his students drag into the light at Nicopolis, can be examined and replaced. Josephine began asking her inner editor a version of the same question the students asked in that Greek classroom. Whose voice is this, actually? Astonishingly often, the answer was her father. Once she could hear the difference, she tested it, spoke her actual opinion in her book club without editing it first. Nothing happened. Nobody recoiled. The danger had never been real. It had only ever been old. 5. What your full size actually looks like. Finally, meet Isaiah. He is 52, and everything in this video has been building toward what his life looks like now, not because he found a formula, but because he spent nearly 2 decades doing the work this video has described. And what remains in his 50s is what that work looks like once it has settled into a person. In his 30s, Isaiah was, by his own description, one of the most accommodating men anyone knew, so carefully calibrated to avoid friction that his wife once told him gently but devastatingly that she sometimes felt married to a very kind stranger. That sentence did something to him that 15 years of minor frustrations never had. What followed was a slow reconstruction, learning to voice opinions before they were requested, to let silence sit in a room instead of rushing to fill it, to say no without 3 sentences of justification trailing behind it. Let's go back one final time to Rome, to that same Senate chamber where Cato once stood alone. It's a different day, a different debate, and the room is thick with senators who have already decided, quietly, privately, which way the vote needs to go to keep Caesar satisfied. Cato is going to say what he actually believes anyway. He knows exactly what it will cost him. He says it regardless, not loudly, not theatrically, but with the specific, unhurried calm of a man who resolved this question about himself years earlier in the mockery of the Roman streets, long before this chamber ever tested it for real. That calm is what eventually made Caesar himself remark more than once that no man in Rome frightened him the way Cato did, not because Cato was dangerous in any physical sense, but because Cato could not be managed. He could not be flattered into silence, threatened into smallness, or embarrassed into retreat. His size was not up for negotiation, and everyone in that chamber, including Caesar, could feel it. That is what Isaiah eventually built on a much smaller and much gentler stage than the Roman Senate. When he speaks now, it's because he has something to say, without the old apologetic scaffolding trailing behind it. When he disagrees plainly. When someone needs him to be smaller so they can be more comfortable, he notices, and he simply does not comply. Epictetus, who understood the architecture of freedom better than almost anyone who has ever lived, left behind the teaching that captures precisely what both Cato and Isaiah eventually arrived at. From very different centuries and very different rooms, no man is free who is not master of himself. That is the 5th principle, and it is the one that reframes everything that came before it. The goal was never to stop caring about people. The goal was to stop confusing your own disappearance with love. Isaiah's wife, years after that devastating sentence about the kind stranger, told him something else, that she finally feels like she knows exactly who she is married to, not the easy version, the actual one. We began today with a particular kind of tired, the exhaustion of making yourself smaller so someone else could feel bigger, one quiet accommodation at a time, until the outline of your actual self became almost impossible to find. And we walked through 5 principles, each one carried across 2,000 years by people who paid a far higher price than most of us will ever be asked to pay to learn them. A man whose leg was broken and who still would not surrender the one thing his master couldn't touch. A senator who trained himself in the mockery of the streets so he could stand alone against Caesar without flinching. An exile on Corsica who learned in silence exactly who his friends had actually been. A teacher in a small Greek town who spent his life making people drag their inherited fears into the light. And that same senator, years later, in that same chamber, refusing, one final time, to be managed. The people who benefit from your smallness will never be the ones who ask you to grow. Your instinct to shrink is trained, not fixed, and it can be retrained. The people who only love the small version of you will not survive your full size, and that is information, not tragedy. Shrinking begins as a belief before it becomes a behavior, and beliefs can be examined and replaced. And on the other side of all of it is not aggression, not coldness, it is simply presence, undiminished, finally, your own. Marcus Aurelius wrote, in the private pages meant for no one but himself, "Be like the rock that the waves keep crashing over. It stands unmoved, and the raging of the sea falls still around it. You were never meant to be smaller than the waves that crash against you. You were meant to be the rock. Stop shrinking for the people who never deserved the sacrifice. They were never going to thank you for it. They were only ever going to get comfortable with less of you than the world was supposed to have. Take care of your mind. The world will take care of itself. Until next time."